Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So we are doing a Graviturgist wizard build, and I'm going to be talking about mid-levels for Graviturgist wizards and the tactics and spells and how I would work the build. Now I've already done a first part where we talked about low levels and some of those low level decisions. If you're interested in looking at that video, I'll put a link up above. Otherwise, let's get started. We're going to jump our wizard to 6th level. This is a 7th level character overall. So we're going to get 3rd level spells. We have 4th level spell slots. And we get potentially the most important subclass ability we're going to get until we get to very high level. And that's Gravity Well. So what Gravity Well does, and this works really nicely with Graviturgy spells that often do a similar thing already, is we've learned how to manipulate gravity around a living being. Whenever you cast a spell on a creature, you can move the target 5 feet to an unoccupied space of your choice. If the target is willing to move, the spell hits it with an attack, or it fails a saving throw against the spell. Now, because of the way this is worded, I need to just specify, if we cast something like Web, now with Web, creatures don't make a saving throw when you cast the spell. There's no to hit roll made when you cast a spell, so when you hit creatures with a Web spell, Gravity Well will not affect them, even if they fail their saving throw on their following turn, because you have already cast a spell. So in order to use Gravity Well effectively, we either have to target allies, so if we do something like a Cure Wounds, we could move an ally. The other thing we can do, and the thing we're going to do more often, is move enemies. And in order to move enemies, we need to target them with a spell that either requires an attack roll or requires a saving throw when we cast it. And our Graviturgy spells pretty much all do that. I will also mention Thorn Whip once again. Really good here, because if we hit somebody with a Thorn Whip, then we can pull them 10 feet. Now we can pull them 15 feet, and 5 of that feet of movement we can have in any direction. So we might pull them 10 feet towards us and 1 over to the side, for example. It really depends on the battle map, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get onto a battle map. But another thing I want to mention is, you hit somebody with Magnify Gravity. We're halving their movement speed, and now we're moving them in addition to that. So if a creature is, let's say, trying to get to you, if it has a 30-foot movement, we now half its movement speed, so now it goes to 15, and then Gravity Well will push it 5 feet back, so it's losing another 5 feet of movement. So it just doesn't have a lot of movement left in order to get to you. But mainly what I want to talk about with Gravity Well is, so once we stick creatures in something like a web, and maybe they're working their way towards the outside, and as I mentioned with spells like Magnify Gravity, we could make that really hard for them. Well, with Gravity Well, we can make it practically impossible, because the web is difficult terrain, Magnify Gravity is going to half their movement speed, and Gravity Well, if they fail their save against the Magnify Gravity, will allow us to move them even further towards the center of the effect. So we can make it really hard for enemies to get out while we're continually blasting them. So we're going to get a cantrip at this level, and if for some reason you weren't able to take Sapping Sting at first level, this is when you take it now. Otherwise, for us, we already have Sapping Sting, so we're going to be looking for one additional effect. And I'm liking Mold Earth here, because we can do things like change the battlefield, create pits, things like that. And then with our character, we can often pull creatures maybe into that pit. So with 3rd level spells, first thing I'm going to take is Counterspell. No big surprise there. Really good spell. If you're a wizard, you pretty much should take Counterspell. It's kind of iconic for the class. Almost could be a class ability rather than a spell. It's one of those spells like that, like Eldritch Blast, where if you are playing a wizard, take Counterspell. Next spell we're going to take is Pulse Wave. Now this is not a spell that I particularly love, but it is a Graviturgy spell that is available to us. And what it does is it creates a 30-foot cone that pushes or pulls objects and creatures. Now the damage here for a 3rd level spell is not great. 66 force damage. Keep in mind that something like a fireball is doing 8d6 damage. And the second thing I don't like very much is the 30-foot cone. Cones are harder to place than spheres, and 30-foot cone isn't all that big. So in terms of area of effect, it's going to be significantly smaller than something like a fireball. Finally, we're talking about the Constitution saving throw. A lot of these Graviturgy spells hit Constitution. That's not ideal. But what I do like about this spell is that there is versatility in whether we're pushing or pulling, because we can cast a spell and we can choose to push and we can choose to pull. So if we have another effect that we want to get enemies caught in, Pulse Wave is far more versatile than something like Thorn Whip, for example. And we can hit multiple creatures with it. So we have a web, bunch of creatures are starting to escape from it, we cast Pulse Wave, we push them all back in. And again, this is one of those spells that doesn't require concentration. So we can be concentrating on that one effect we want to push creatures into, and Pulse Wave is a good way to do that. And remember, as a Graviturgist, anyone who fails their saving throw against this spell, we can move an additional 5 feet in any direction we want. Second spell I like here is Fly. Now, Fly is obviously a useful utility spell. It can be useful in combat, can get you out of trouble. It can be useful for maneuverability, but keep in mind, we can do other things with Fly as well. So for example, if we are flying in a combat and we fly above a bunch of enemies and we cast Pulse Wave on them, then any that fail their saving throw are pulled 15 feet towards us, if that's what we choose, and that's what we would choose. And then we can have them move an additional 5 feet towards us because we are a Graviturgist. So now they are 20 feet in the air, and now they're going to fall 20 feet and take 20 feet of falling damage and likely fall prone. So we can combine things like Fly with things like Pulse Wave, with things like our Graviturgist abilities to really control the battlefield and mess up our enemies. And the final spell I'm going to take is Sleet Storm, because again, this fulfills the requirements that we're looking for with this character. So this is a concentration spell, so this would be one of those effects that we're going to place on our enemies, and as they escape the Sleet Storm, that's when we'd be using our various Graviturgy abilities to push them right back in. In a lot of ways, Sleet Storm is going to be far superior to Web. The first is, it is a much, much bigger area, and the second thing about Sleet Storm is, the moment a creature enters the area for the first time, they have to make a saving throw immediately. In addition, if a creature starts its turn there, it has to make a saving throw. So if we push creatures into a Sleet Storm, let's say we use a Pulse Wave, then those creatures would be making a saving throw the moment they enter the Sleet Storm. And even if they make that saving throw at the beginning of their turn, they're going to have to make a saving throw. And if they fail, they're going to fall prone. And they're not just going to fall prone, they're going to fall prone in difficult terrain. So now they have to use half their movement to stand up, and after they use half their movement, the last half of their movement has to be used to get through difficult terrain. So they're very likely going to have to dash just to get out of the Sleet Storm, in which case we could pulse them again. So this is a really good spell for this kind of wizard. And if we know where creatures are within the Sleet Storm and we hit them with something like a Magnify Gravity, they're not going anywhere. Now, the one thing I might do different with spell selection really depends on the party I'm in. If somebody else can get Lehman's Tiny Hut, let them. But if nobody else can get Lehman's Tiny Hut, I would probably take it, and I might take it instead of Sleet Storm, and still rely on the good old Web from my second level spells. So in that case, I would look at Lehman's Tiny Hut over Sleet Storm. So it really depends on what the rest of our party brings to the table. So at 7th level, the spells I am preparing will be Grease, Magnify Gravity, Shield, Levitate, Misty Step, Web, Counterspell, Fly, and Pulse Wave. When it comes to scaling spells, the spell I would be looking at casting with 4th level slots mainly is Fly, because Fly allows us to target a second creature, so we're getting basically double the effect when we cast it with a 4th level slot. And we only have one 4th level slot, so really good chance we'll use it up on a Fly spell. So jumping our wizard ahead to level 8, this is a 9th level character overall now. We're going to get an ability score improvement at this point. Nothing wrong with taking a feat here. You can go ahead and take something like Lucky, and it's going to be a good feat for you. But I am going to recommend going up your intelligence. Not only does this character require a lot of saving throws, those saving throws are often Constitution, so often creatures have a decent chance of making those saving throws, so every point counts. But in addition, this is a character that wants that preparation slot. An additional bonus from intelligence is going to give us. So increasing our intelligence is going to bring it up to an 18 plus 4, and it's going to give us an additional preparation. So we're going to add some 4th level spells to this character. And again, we've got another spell that is a Graviturgy spell that we definitely want to grab. And that is Gravity Sinkhole. So this is a spell, again, no concentration, and it's a 120-foot range, so good range, and a 20-foot radius sphere, so it has a good area of effect. Basically the same area of effect that we get from a fireball. And what happens is every creature in the area makes a Constitution saving throw. And if they fail that saving throw, they take 5d10 force damage. That's not great damage for a 4th level spell, but again, this is one of those things where we're doing a bit of damage and we're having an additional effect. The moving is already going to be really useful to us, but we're going to be softening up all the enemies while we do it. And what will happen is, if they fail their save, they are pulled in a straight line towards the center of the effect, and they end as close to the middle as possible. So there's technically no range limit. They might be moving a full 20 feet. And the gravity sinkhole doesn't have to be on the ground. So again, we can pull creatures up, and then they can fall and take some falling damage. And remember, as a Graviturgist, we can give them an additional 5 feet of height so that they can fall an additional 5 feet. But we might want to move them to the side a little bit, and I'll explain why in a sec. Because the next spell we'll want to take is Black Tentacles, or Everd's Black Tentacles if you prefer. Thank you, Moonsilver, for this idea, because he pointed out with Black Tentacles, unlike Web, because often I compare these spells. Black Tentacles and Web are very similar, except Black Tentacles does a little bit of damage. But the nice thing about Black Tentacles is you make a saving throw as soon as you enter the effect. So, like Sleet Storm, this is one of those spells where if we push creatures into a Black Tentacles with something like a Gravity Sinkhole, then they are going to be making a saving throw the moment they enter the effect, and even if they make that saving throw, then they're going to have to make another saving throw as soon as they start their turn. And that means they might take 66 bludgeoning damage just by the beginning of their turn, and twice the chance that they will be restrained. So again, this is one of those spells that we would like to throw on the battlefield and then use our other spells to get them into it. Now, what I would be doing here is, if there are creatures near the Black Tentacles, then I would use a Gravity Sinkhole, and I would pull them towards the tentacles, but not directly towards the tentacles. I would pull them above the tentacles. I'd pull them diagonally up so that they're going to take falling damage as they fall into the Black Tentacles effect. Then they're going to be making their saving throw, then take additional bludgeoning damage. Then at the beginning of their turn, they're going to take additional bludgeoning damage and be restrained. And that's why my Graviturgist ability to move somebody side to side rather than another 5 feet up is maybe what I do if it's going to put them in that Black Tentacles effect when otherwise it might not. The next spell I want to take is Watery Sphere. When we talk about spells that move around enemies where they don't want to go, Watery Sphere is one of those spells. Now, it uses concentration, so unlike our Graviturgy spells, this one is more for just taking somebody right out of the combat. But Watery Sphere is one of those effects that we might use our Graviturgy spells to push creatures into, because any creature in the sphere space makes the strength saving throw, so if we push a creature into the Watery Sphere, it could help us capture creatures with it, and then we can move them around wherever we want. So this is a good battlefield control spell, and we might use this instead of Black Tentacles if we really have advantage in moving creatures to a specific spot rather than sticking them in one spot. And final spell I'll take here is Arcane Eye. This is just a good utility spell. I probably won't have the slots to prepare it, but it is something that if I know I'm going to need, then I can just prepare it in the morning. So our preparations haven't changed from the level before, except we're adding Black Tentacles, Gravity Sinkhole, and Watery Sphere. So Black Tentacles is kind of going to be my primary location that I'm going to be looking to push those enemies into. And Gravity Sinkhole isn't a terrible spell for us to scale. We get an extra d10 of damage. It's not super powerful, but it is one way we might use our 5th level slots. We also might use our 5th level slots for fly, so we can have 3 party members flying. So we're going to take our wizard down to 10th level. This is now an 11th level character overall. So we're going to be picking some 5th level spells, and we will have some 6th level slots. But we get another subclass ability, and that is Violent Attraction. So what happens there is when any creature we can see within 60 feet of us, which is going to be most creatures most of the time, hits with a weapon attack, we can use our reaction to increase their damage by 1d10 of the weapon's damage type. And the other use of this is if somebody is falling and taking falling damage, we can increase the fall's damage by 2d10. So who's going to be taking falling damage? Well, if you looked at what we can do with Gravity Sinkhole, if you've looked at what we can do with Pulse Wave and Fly, then certainly a lot of our enemies are going to be falling a lot of the time. 2d10 damage is more than 1d10 damage, so this is probably the way I would use it most of the time. We are going to cause creatures to fall reasonably often, and we can increase the damage of that fall now by 2d10. So if we think about the combination we talked about with our last level, we do a Gravity Sinkhole. That does damage. pulls a creature up. Now they're going to fall. That does damage. Now we're going to do Violent Attraction. That's going to increase the damage. They landed in a Black Tentacles. That's going to do damage. And then at the beginning of the round, Black Tentacles will do damage to them again. So we can be doing damage, although none of it is super flashy on its own. That is going to add up. We're talking about gravity single damage. We're talking about falling damage. We're talking about increased falling damage. We're talking about Black Tentacles damage twice. So if we don't kill creatures with this, we are definitely softening them up a lot. We're adding another cantrip at this level, and we're probably not using cantrips all that much anymore. We have a lot of spell slots now. So I wouldn't expect to be casting a lot of cantrips, certainly in combat. So I would be looking for utility cantrips. So something like Mending. We might choose something like Message. Depending on our party, we might choose something like Light. But I'm going to choose Mending here. Then we're going to pick 4 5th level spells. And the first one I'm going to take is Rary's Telepathic Bond, because we're going to have preparation issues here. Because we're only going to have 2 additional preparation slots, and we're picking 4 spells. So picking a ritual makes a lot of sense. There are no Graviturgist spells at 5th level for us to choose from. But we are a wizard, and we now have 5th level spells. We should take Wall of Force. Really good spell for any wizard when they get to this level. Bigby's Hand, I think, is also a good spell for us to take here. This, again, will use our concentration, but we can do a lot of things with it. We can just hit creatures using our bonus action, and it scales well if we do that. So if we are using our higher level spell slot, Bigby's Hand is something we might want to do. But in addition, we can do things like we can hold creatures in place, we can push them, so we can block their movement. So when it comes to pushing and pulling things around, Bigby's Hand has some options in addition to the option of doing damage. And finally, we're going to take Transmute Rock. Because, and again, with this kind of character, Transmute Rock is going to be maybe my first selection, actually, of 5th level spells. And it's going to be something I'm 100% going to prepare. Because this is the first one of those effects where we really want to push creatures into that doesn't use concentration since Grease. So Transmute Rock does a 40-foot cube, so we can contain several creatures in there. And creatures that are stuck in that mud moves at 1/4 their normal rate. So when we are talking about combining this with things like Pulse Wave, for example, pushing creatures that are just trying to get out of that Transmute Rock with a Pulse Wave could prevent them from ever getting out of there. Or even something like a Magnify Gravity. If they fail their saving throw on a Magnify Gravity and their speed is halved, so you have a creature with a 30-foot movement speed, now it's got a 15-foot movement speed, and it requires 4 feet of movement to move 1 foot. They can't even move 1 square. So Transmute Rock is perfect for this kind of character. And again, the creatures within there don't even get a saving throw for the reduced movement. So when it comes to preparing, we can't prepare all the spells we want here unless we unprepare something of a lower level. But we're not casting all these spells anyway. We don't have that many spell slots to be casting these spells, though we do have a 6th level spell slot available. And because we have that 6th level spell slot available, it does make sense to prepare a couple of these spells because we can probably be casting a couple of these spells. The first one I'm definitely preparing is Transmute Rock. I just went on a big rant about it, you know why. So then you have to choose between Bigby's Hand and Wall of Force. Wall of Force, I'd say, is slightly better spell than Bigby's Hand, though they're both really good spells. But if I'm looking at casting a spell with my 6th level slot, I might even lean towards Bigby's Hand just because it scales well. So you could go either way, and it might change from day to day. I might go with Bigby's Hand one day and Wall of Force another day. So what's happened now is we now have an effect we can create on the battlefield, not going to use our concentration, so concentration cannot be interrupted, that is going to almost entirely immobilize our enemies if we can push them into it. And that is our specialty. We can push them into it, and they don't get a saving throw. So that is just going to change what this character can do. That's going to happen the moment you get to 9th level in Wizard and you take Transmute Rock. So that is the mid-levels for the Graviturgist Wizard. In our next video, we're going to be talking about the high levels, and we're going to take this build right through level 19. So we will be starting at level 12 and moving on to then. I hope you'll join me then.